Why is it so hard to slow down when you're used to overworking, performing, and a lot of the roles that we're in? That's what we'll be talking about today. So, welcome if you are joining. My name is Marissa Price. I am a healing practitioner, helping Black women heal from the trauma that we experience in different environments, one of those being the workplace. But yes, I have a wonderful guest with me today, Dara. I'll pass it over to her to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about her channel and her art. Anything you want to share?
Hello, Marissa. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's a pleasure to talk to you in person because sort of hard to believe. This is the first time we've actually talked live. So this
Yes.
is a real pleasure for me. And I am so grateful for having a chance to talk to your audience here on your channel. I feel a little out of my depth because you have people here that are like experts in their field and whatnot. And I'm here just, as a layman. And, especially on the topic that you proposed here today in terms of, sort of rest and what it takes to
Mhm.
get to a place of rest after overworking and using that as an opportunity to heal your body. I am an artist, a multimedia artist, and that is a new sort of definition for me. I left the corporate world almost 3 years ago to not today, but just about 3 years ago, and embarked in what this new adventure of early retirement and continuing to explore the art world and all things
Mhm.
creative, which I discovered while I was still working. And I have been using it as a means of rediscovering what it is to play and to rest and using that to heal, I think some really sort of deep seated burnout that I had been dealing with, that I
Mhm.
certainly identified. And that was one of the things that moved me to both leave my job and to leave the US. I've now been based in Mexico City. But my body recently showed me that, there was still more healing to be done. So I'm sure we'll get into
Mm.
that. But what I do now is I travel, I play with art supplies, and I rest. That's what I do professionally.
Ooh, I love that. I love that. And so,
Yes.
Gerard and I, yeah, we were both in Rashida Dow's group coaching program for Burnout to Bliss. That's how we met. But I
Yes.
remember you sharing through different chats that I saw you in, sharing like the process to transition into rest is sometimes difficult, right? After we come from these very like high pressure jobs that
Mhm.
require us to perform all the time. And so, how was that transition for you, like transitioning into ease to playing with art supplies, as you mentioned now?
Um, it was an interesting process, and one that's still ongoing. I have always sort of joked around that I know I was royalty in past life, that I know how to lounge in a way
Mhm.
that I don't think many other people know how to. But there's a real difference between sort of lounging and sort of luxuriating in that, like on a
Mhm.
weekend or during a vacation, and actually resting, like truly resting your body and your mind. And that's something that I'm still working at. Like those are two very, very different things. We talk a lot about self-care, and it's very
Mhm.
similar to, folks will talk about self-care and they'll talk about getting a manicure or they'll talk about getting a pedicure. In my mind, that's not really self care. When you
Mhm.
look at the pioneers of the folks that really started talking about self care, it was community care, it was about
Mhm.
connection, it was about, being aware of what your needs are, figuring out how to get those needs met, both individually and, as a community. And it's sort of like comparing, sort of that superficiality of
Yes.
pampering,
Uh-huh.
which has its place, right? Like that's really
Mhm.
important in it. And it's lovely to feel pampered and to, release a bit of stress at the end of the day by taking care of yourself. And I'm sure you can hear that Mexico City traffic, which, I guess in a past life, I would have said, oh, there's no way that I could rest or relax with that kind of traffic going on. Now I can because I'm not in it, right? Like I'm not
Mhm.
rushing
Mhm.
anywhere. So that traffic doesn't bother me. Um, but But there's a difference between being pampered and pampering yourself, and maybe spending time digging deep into your needs, and maybe that's through things like journaling, self-expression, which could be dance, which could be painting. And these days I'm really spending a lot of time thinking about creative expression, and
Mm-hmm.
that's really what I have been spending my time doing, tapping into uh, this new sort of creativity that I've discovered in myself, and moving into this place of being an artist. Now, I had sort of tapped into that before leaving my job,
Okay, I was
but
going
I
to
am
ask.
still learning
Mm-hmm.
how to rest. I've gotten much better at it, but the
Mm-hmm.
universe told me that I still had work to do,
Mm-hmm.
due to a unexpected incident that happened while I was on my way to get more rest. I was on my way to a vacation, and had an
Mm-hmm.
acute health incident almost a year ago to the day, um,
Mm-hmm.
that told me that although I had sat my butt down,
Mm-hmm.
there was maybe some residual stress still in my body,
Yeah.
that at the end of the day, there's only so much you can do, right?
That's
There's only
true.
so
Yeah.
much you can control.
Mm-hmm.
And so that helped me make some decisions, and is continuing to help me decide on almost a daily basis how I continue to show up for myself, and how I want to live what's left of the life that I have. I don't even know if I answered your question. I was
You
rambling, but
did. You
okay.
did. Yeah. And to your point, right, our bodies will give us these messages, right?
Mhm.
As you mentioned, that lingering feeling of overwork, maybe burnout, right, through
Mhm.
physical health symptoms that pop up.
Oh,
And I think
yes.
that's so important to mention, right? Something I'll be
Mhm.
talking about all throughout this month, Somatic October, how our bodies like hold these things that we experience, and then they pop up different ways, right? When we may not be
Absolutely.
expecting it. So I think that's really important to share. Hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. In the first few months after I'd quit my job and I moved, I was sleeping like a baby. Just it had gotten so bad, Marissa. I was just on a cruise with my family, and I was explaining to them, because um, they, I run into people and they're like, "You've retired? Like what? Huh? Why?"
Hmm.
And I, and a lot of this was of my own making, and I take accountability for it, but I no longer blame myself. And I think that that was part of what I had to work through at first, when I had some time on my hands. I liken it to, and I liken it to this, and I don't mean to belittle anyone's situation who may have been through this, but it's the closest I can come to it. I liken it to having left an abusive relationship, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
That there were some moments where I sort of struggled with the I should have left earlier. I didn't set clear boundaries, blaming, sort of that
Hmm.
blame and shame game. So there was some time spent after I left where, once I got through the honeymoon period of, the good sleep, and the waking up in the morning and not having to do a damn thing if I didn't
Hmm.
want to. The only reason I needed to leave my bed was to go to the bathroom and to take my dog out, which I guess both involve the bathroom. But anyway, um, once I got past that sort of maybe initial stage, the next stage was the reflection, right? And that was maybe the, wow, what could I have done differently? Wow, how much was I caught up in, maybe, I guess, the need for approval, which is almost embarrassing to say. And I don't know when, well, no, I know when that started. It was the gold stars. It was the gold
Yes.
stars when
Yes.
I was a kid, and it was the $5 I got for every A, that family members
Hmm.
were like, "Well, now we're going to change that to two because you're getting too many damn A's." and dancing school recitals that every year for the family members that didn't attend. And they come to the house, and my mom would say, "Oh, run upstairs, put your costume on." And then I'd be in the living room like a fool doing the thing, whatever. But anyway, so it started early,
Mm-hmm.
as a quote unquote gifted child. But anyway, again, I'm sort of past the blame and shame, but I went through the blame and shame phase of the why didn't I do it differently? Here's how I could have done it differently. Um, and then it was like, okay, but that's not what happened. I'm in this different phase now. I'm not going to beat myself up, right? Because that negates the place that I'm in now. I'm not going to be able to take advantage of the opportunity to rest now. And then it was, all right, let's try the yoga, let's get the massages, let's, do the journaling. And journaling was always a big thing for me. It was frankly, I think the only reason I survived. But my body never seemed to settle down to a place of relaxation. And it's not relaxation. I guess I would say I always felt like my nervous system was wired up at a level that seemed curious to me. It seemed odd. And I remember saying, I might have even said it to Picky Girl who's commenting there, maybe this is just how it is. Because then you also have to couple this with the fact that, I am perimenopausal, and had been dealing with some health issues. And of course, none of my doctors, even though I was paying for concierge medicine and all of these other things, ever connected the dots, right? And even though I worked in the healthcare industry myself, never really connected the dots around, the sleep issues and the brain fog, and I'm a late age diagnosed ADHD person, which describes so much of my
Wow.
personality, so much of my personality, and so much of the rejection sensitivity too that I have, right? Which was why always the overperforming, a lot of that was. But I was like, well, maybe this is just how it feels at this age. Maybe I'm always just a little hyper vigilant, right? Like I was sleeping in earplugs, which not a surprise, Mexico City, a little noisy, that sort of thing. But it just, everything felt, my nerve endings felt a little frazzled. But again, I was like, I'm here, I'm relaxed, I have no external stress. So maybe this is just my body now. And I left it at that. And then here we are a couple of years in, and I find myself in an acute health crisis. And lo and behold, that was not my normal.
Wow.
That was not my normal. So I don't know if you want to get into that now.
Yeah, we can. Because I think that's really important, maybe for other people who may be experiencing something similar, right? Anything that you feel comfortable sharing around what you experienced and I guess what you learned through that.
Yeah. I guess what I learned was, you got to listen to your body. I don't think there's anything that I would have done differently because I don't think there was anything different to have been done. I was seeing doctors, getting tests. There was nothing that was showing up that was wrong. But I was just like, again, different, new normal, different normal. I had chalked up the not feeling quite right to the stress of the job. The stress of the job was gone. I can now sleep. I can now control my environment. So, this is just, I'm now a lot older than, I had been. So, I was going on a trip, accompanying my sister on a business trip. And I was like, oh, you want me to help coordinate an itinerary? I can do that. I've got time on my hands. I've been traveling. This is what I do, right? So we are on our way to the Philippines and to Thailand. And I'm mad it's only going to be for like 3.5 weeks. I haven't been able to like twist her arm into it being longer than that. But like, I'm excited. It's my first time over there. And we're going to have a ball. So I fly to the States, to make my run to pick up, things that I couldn't get here. And we were going to fly together to the Philippines. So we leave Dulles, we leave the DC metro area. We're on our way to San Francisco. We're going to catch a flight from San Francisco to Manila. We're about halfway on the flight to San Francisco, and we're having a lot of turbulence. So they're not serving drinks or anything like that. And I just start feeling a little odd. And I was like, no big deal, just a little strange. And I was like, huh. So I said to my sister, I said, I feel a little strange. And she said, so do I. And I was like, oh, okay. Maybe it's just the turbulence, no big deal. I started falling asleep on a movie. It got interesting. I woke up, which is an important part of the story. And I was like, oh, this movie is actually good. So I stayed awake and watched it. The movie ended, and I'm trying to find something else that will fit into the time left of the flight. Modern conveniences, they will now advise you if you pick something that's too long, so you won't be left out there. So I'm trying to find something. And as I am, I'm feeling a little weird, just kind of off kilter, but I couldn't really describe to you what the feeling was. I now think it might have been like vertigo-ish feelings, but I don't know because I've never really had vertigo that I know of. So I say to my sister, I'm like, hey, can I have your water bottle? Because I had a cup, but I know they weren't doing service. So I go to pour some water and my hand is shaking a little bit. And I'm like, maybe I'm just dehydrated. And then I feel this like little weird sensation at the back of my head, kind of at the top of my neck. And I later described it as, it felt like a tight rosebud that just opened. That's it. Just a little rosebud that just gently opened. And I looked at my sister again, and I said to her, I think I'm having a stroke. And she said, what? And I said, I think I'm having a stroke. And she said, what? And I'm like, okay, she can't hear me over the turbulence. So I said it again, and then I could hear myself slurring a little bit. And I was like, oh shit, I am having a stroke. So I pushed the button for the flight attendants. So they're like, oh, turbulence, only press again if it's an emergency. And I'm like, well, press again. So they come up, ma'am, how can we help you? And I said, I believe I'm having a stroke. And I enunciated because I knew that I was, could potentially be slurring, but I enunciated perfectly. And she just looked at me like, she's like, excuse me? And I got it because I'm sure that most people having a stroke don't tell you they're having a stroke. And I said again, I believe I'm having a stroke. And she said, oh, and another flight attendant had walked up at that point. So they kind of like did the Keystone Cops thing and kind of bumped into each other. And one went one way, one went another way. And I just realized I couldn't see the comments. And so they got on the radio, on the phone, and they said, if there's a clinician on board, we have somebody with a medical emergency, if you could come forward to help. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And so a doctor came up and sat next to me and said, what seems to be the problem? So I told him again, I was like, I think I'm having a stroke. Describe what happened. So he asked me to squeeze his hand with my right hand, and I did. He asked me to lift my right leg. I did. He put his hand in my left hand and asked me to squeeze his left hand, squeeze his hand. And I did, but I didn't. I mean, I thought I did, but my hand didn't move. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then he asked me to lift my left leg, and it didn't move either. And I was like, wow, that is trippy. Because I told my leg, my arm to move, my hand to move, my leg to move the same way I did on the other side, but nothing
Mhm.
happened. So I was just like, that is weird. And
And you could
I
sense
just,
that the entire time. You were
oh,
giving,
absolutely.
but your body wasn't moving.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. And so, when I tell this story to people, they're like, oh my God, you must have been so scared. I'm like, oh, contraire, mon frere. I was not scared. I was interested, is probably the best thing that curious, curious, interested. I don't know. It was just bizarre that my hand couldn't move. I couldn't move my arm, that I couldn't move my leg. And then I'm just, and I'm if there's a way that I could describe how I tried to crawl into my brain to figure out what was happening,
Hmm.
it was very strange, but I had no fear because I was awake. I felt the whole thing happen. So, and my sister, of course, is just sitting there looking at me like, what the, you know,
Hmm.
and so, the doctor, they get him the bag, they give me an aspirin, whatever. They bring oxygen, and I know that, oxygen is the number one thing you need. So I'm
Hmm.
sucking on that oxygen like I'm back on the 8th grade swim team, full
Hmm.
lung capacity. I must have killed like 2 or 3 tanks by the time we landed. Um, and I'm just, sucking on the oxygen. And but I wasn't scared at all. Like at all. I was fascinated. I guess that's the best word. I was fascinated that I was telling my arm and my leg to move and they wouldn't. How is that possible? How does that work? And so they're trying to figure out, do we land the plane? Do we not? And he basically, in connecting with the kind of talking to the pilot through the flight attendants, he said to me, he's like, look, uh, if I ask them to, they will divert the plane and they'll land it. He said, the problem is I don't know where we are. There's a
Mm.
medication that we give in case of a stroke that if you get it within 4 hours or so of the initial symptoms, you have a good prognosis, just a good prognosis. Obviously that's about all he said.
Hmm.
He's like, the problem is we often don't know when a stroke occurs. He said, you know exactly when yours occurred. He said, if we land now, I don't know where we are. I don't know how they're equipped in terms of the hospital. We're about 2 hours outside of San Francisco. I work in San Francisco. Right next to the airport, there's a hospital with a premier stroke trauma unit. If you were my wife, if you were my sister, that's where I would advise you go. So I said, all right, that's where we're going then. And
Hmm.
so I settled in and I sat there and chatted with him about Mexico. I tried to talk him into retiring early. We talked about art, trying to learn a language, and we just chatted. The flight attendants kept coming by and checking up on me. And in between huffing on oxygen, I'd be like, can I have a cranberry juice, please? Put the oxygen mask back on.
Wow.
And we're just chatting. My sister, I think, is just kind of staring at me. And at one point, in between chatting, she says to me, she was like, I think she was freaked out, not scared, but freaked out because she was just like, how are you, how are you that aware of what's going on in your body?
Right. Uh-huh.
And I'm like, years of pain,
Mm.
and I say to this day that if it had been pain, I might have ignored it because I'm used to pain, but it wasn't
Mhm.
pain. It was this gentle, it felt like an unfolding, like a flower opening. And I stayed with that, even though the doctors, some doctors just have no creativity. As I tried to explain to them that that was the feeling, but I was like, y'all gonna have to meet me. I'm not altering the experience to describe it in a way that you better understand. I'm describing it as it
Right.
is, and you better catch up. So I
Hmm.
described it to them as I stayed in the hospital. I wound up being in the intensive care unit at the hospital there for 8 days afterwards when we landed. Um, because and I think one of the reasons I was there as long as I was because they never figured out why I had the stroke.
Mm.
They couldn't figure out anything. They tested me for everything. I had every scan known to man. I had a spinal tap. I had everything. I had electrodes on my scalp. I had anything. They tested me for MS, everything. Nothing.
Mhm.
They couldn't find anything. Um, Now, there's two important things in this story. One is while we were on the plane and I'm chatting with the doctor and I'm, sipping on my little cranberry juice and sucking on oxygen, I could I started to feel like I would take a big huff of oxygen and I would feel like little tingles in my brain.
Mhm.
Um like it was almost like itchiness.
Interesting. Okay.
And something told me, "Oh, it's trying like I'm a nerd. I'm a nerd.
Me too.
Let me back up a little bit. And I have ADHD. That is a
Mhm.
lethal combination. I am a I'm like a junior expert on a lot of stuff. And at
Mhm.
some point, I think, oh, I noticed, and that wasn't at some point, when I got diagnosed with ADHD, and it made so much of my life make sense, I became fascinated with the brain. So I started reading so many books on like neurology, there's all kinds of books like Your Brain on Religion, Your Brain in this, and just lots of different books about the brain. So as I started feeling my brain sort of light up and tingling, I was like, "Oh shit, it's trying to rewire."
Mm.
So
Mhm.
I would take a big huff of oxygen and then try to move my fingers, and take another big puff of oxygen and try to move my fingers and try to move my toes. And over time, because I had 2 hours to sit there on the plane, as I did that, I got my leg back completely. I would take a breath and try to wiggle my toes. Take a breath and try to wiggle my toes, and my brain would light up and itch. The only way when I say itch, you remember you'd fall when you were a kid,
Mhm.
and as the little scab was healing, it would itch. The skin would get tight around
Yes.
it. That's
Uh-huh.
kind of what. And I know this is probably going to sound crazy to anybody if they're a neurosurgeon or know anything about neurology. But that's what it felt like to me. And I was like, well, that feels like healing. So I would take a deep breath and I'd try to wiggle. So eventually I was wiggling my toes. I was like, oh shit, okay, this is working. Then I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
now I'm gonna try to move my foot. Then I got my foot moving. Then I could move my whole leg. So I was like, okay, this is working. So then I would take a puff of oxygen and I try to move my fingers. Got my fingers back. Then I would take a puff of oxygen, and I couldn't really do much with my leg to test it out, but I could lift my knee up and down. So I knew that was working. I
Mhm.
was able to move my fingers, but they were weird. Like these three would kind of stick together. I couldn't move them independently. But I was like, okay, let me see if I can get my arm back. Um, couldn't get my arm back. But the harder I tried to separate my fingers, like I'd think, move your fingers, and my elbow would shoot up.
Interesting. Okay.
Mm.
Mhm.
So I was like, okay, it's rewiring, but it's making the wrong connections.
Mhm.
And so, but I could F with my sister because she's sitting on this side of me. So I'm talking to the doctor over here, and I would take a puff of oxygen and move my fingers, and then my elbow would shoot up. Because she's trying to read, and I think just probably try to calm herself now. But I was like, why not use this as an opportunity to F with her? So I'm chatting and sipping cranberry juice and puffing oxygen and just like elbowing her. And finally she was like, hey, girl, cut it out. And I was like, Maya, I can't. It's for science. Like, I gotta keep it up, right? So finally we land, and the paramedics get on, and they take him aside so they can get his story. They're asking me questions. They're trying to keep all the passengers in their seats. Everybody's being very cooperative, but they're having trouble getting the gurney down the aisle. So I'm like, just move out the way. Let me get off the plane. So I walked off
Mhm.
the plane. hopped on the gurney. I didn't have control of my arm. So I had to hold my arm as I walked off because it would have
Mm-hmm.
hit people, or, I could have hurt it because it was basically dead. It was a dead limb. Um, but I did walk off the plane. I got on the gurney and then was in the ICU for 8 days. So fast forward,
Mm-hmm.
which is not something I do well. Um, Afterwards, I'm back at home. I have a follow up with the neurosurgeon that I worked with. I worked with so many specialists while I was in the hospital there. And, she just wanted to make sure that I was my transition of care was good, that I had good care. She wanted to make sure that the neurologist here had reviewed the records. If she found anything that they had missed, she said no. And I asked her, I said, listen, I have a question for you. I said, you haven't found anything. I said, I completely reviewed all the test results, because little did she know how things work here in Mexico. When my neurologist here, because I happen to have migraines, but they found that to be completely unrelated. When she got the records, she sat me down in her office and we went through everything with a fine comb for an hour and a half in one
Wow.
visit, because that's how they do
Mm-hmm.
it here. That's not
Mm-hmm.
medicine in the US. And she said, there's nothing. There's no reason you should have had this stroke. Nothing in my blood work, nothing um, uh, sort of structural in my brain, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked the neurologist back in San Francisco, I said, do you think it's possible that maybe I had a subclinical level of like inflammation or something in my body that I have just been carrying with me? And I kind of went through how I'd been feeling over the previous 2 years, just kind of like my nervous system was slightly raw. I was kind of hyper vigilant. And I was like, do you think that that could have contributed to the stroke? You know?
Mm-hmm.
And she said, honestly, yeah. She's like, we're limited in what we know. She's like, but if you know that something hadn't been feeling quite right, because friends and family, everybody's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry this happened. This has to be scary, whatever. It was never scary. I was never scared, ever.
Mm-hmm.
Not even laying up in the hospital bed. I look at pictures of myself in the hospital bed. That kind of freaks me out a little bit, because I'm like, how was that? How was that me? Kind of looking at it from the outside in. But I was never scared at all of the potential outcome or anything. But I feel like that stroke gave my brain a reset. I felt
Interesting.
so much better after the stroke than I
Mm-hmm.
did before, in terms of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very strange. And that was what I talked to her about. I said, do you think it's possible? And it could have been the medication. They did give me a dose of steroids. And I know, that got me, probably feeling a little better than
Right.
normal. But it almost was like, I felt like you give a car battery a jump.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That was what it felt like to me. And a month later, I went surfing for the first time.
A month later.
Because I literally didn't have any physical negative results. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I 2 days into my stay at the ICU, because I had gotten my hair colored, and they had glued all these electrodes on my scalp, and I talked one of the nurses into letting me take a shower and wash my hair. And I remember her being on the phone or on her radio with, I guess it was the remote team, because she had to take all of the sensors off of me.
Mm-hmm.
And, she kept, I guess they kept calling her. And she's like, oh, no, I'm here with her. I'm giving her a sponge bath, blah, 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 blah. Like every couple minutes. And I'm not putting two and two together. And I get out and I was like, hey, you guys why don't you have shower curtains? And she's like, nobody has ever showered here. You're in the stroke ICU. Like, there are people here that can't drink, like can't swallow.
Right.
They
Mm-hmm.
can't get out the bed. Like
Yeah.
nobody has ever taken a shower on this floor. And I'm like, oh, oh, oh.
Wow.
And so, when I saw my neurologist here and she'd reviewed the results or whatever, and I'd had the surfing trip booked, and I said to her, of course, everybody in San Francisco was like, no, there's no way you can do that. I said to the
Mm-hmm.
neurologist here, I said, well, what do you think about this trip? And I had already advised the host of the trip that, I probably wouldn't be coming. She basically was like, girl, you better live your life. She's like, because you're fine.
Mm-hmm.
I had no deficiencies in strength, movement, anything. I lose my words from time to time, but I don't think that's any worse than how it was before, because #perimenopause. Um, you know, so there was no rehab. There was nothing to rehab. I thought my eyesight had gotten worse.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the neurologist, she did another MRI 6 months later, reviewed the results. She showed me where a stroke occurred. She was like, girl, this was nowhere near the occipital lobe. Get out of here. That's your eyes are old. Get out my face. It was not the stroke. So yeah, there
And can I
was
ask you about the difference, what it sounds like between medical care in the US versus Mexico and what you experienced?
well, I will say this. It is hard for me. If we're going to talk about the stroke and the acute care that I got,
Mm-hmm.
no different. That I couldn't have asked for better care. I could
Mm-hmm.
not have asked for better care, but I was in California.
Mm-hmm.
That team, if I could find them all and hug them, I would. They were
Mm-hmm.
the best people ever. I got the best care. Um, but again, I think it in part was because I was in the stroke ICU. They were used to dealing with patients who needed a very high level of care, who often couldn't speak for themselves. I was speaking
Mm-hmm.
all over the place. Um, and, I was suggesting changes to some of the things that they were doing to screen for certain things, because the first couple of days I was there, they would come in and do screenings with me. First, it was every 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Then, depending on the results, then it was every hour. They like, what do you see in this picture? What is the month? What is your name? Where are you? Because again, a stroke is a traumatic brain injury. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it's funny now because I have friends who, as successfully as I recovered, they're like, oh, you had a TIA, you had a transient. I'm like, no, baby, I had a full on stroke. It wasn't transient. It wasn't small. Like I could see, my doctor showed me the scar tissue in my brain. Um, it's just that my results were very, very different. And I am very, very grateful. And I don't take that for granted.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think part of the reason I wasn't scared is because I don't think I'm any more special than anyone else. And if
Mm-hmm.
other people have traumatic things happen to them, why couldn't it happen to me?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know. I have a very odd perspective on things like that. Um, so I don't really get scared at big things. You know, give me some dumb corporate thing that I have to do and then I can't sleep all night. But a stroke, oh, that's nothing. Which just goes to show, how twisted some of that is.
Mm-hmm.
But the care that I received in that moment, just off the charts, amazing. Um, I will probably say that the aftercare could not be compared, though, just because clinicians here have the time. They have the
Mm-hmm.
time. And no matter how amazing that neurologist is and was in San Francisco, there is no way that her practice manager would allow her. And that's an interesting thing to say about a woman with her credentials and her training, that she would have to be allowed. But there's no way that anybody would allow her to sit with one patient in her office for an hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
Because that on one copay, get out of here.
Yes. Ooh, I so appreciate you sharing that. Right. And I think your creative way of detailing how that felt is so important because sometimes our experiences are outside of like a medical handbook.
Mm-hmm.
And so to have that real life example that it felt like a flower, like a rose, as you mentioned, kind of opening up.
That's
Mm-hmm.
literally the only way the only way I could describe it. And um I remember trying to think of a different way to describe it. A, to make it easier on them, and I could see how hard they were struggling. This is such a silly thing. But I've been a people pleaser all my life. And I was like, I'll be damned. I had a stroke. Y'all gonna figure it out. I'm not coming up with some other example to make it easier on you all. Um, I don't think that what I'm saying is so obtuse. You all are
Mm-hmm.
educated enough. Talk amongst yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the story I stuck with. I'm going back to sleep.
Um, I want to ask about you mentioned creative expression,
Hmm.
right? And how that has been a part of your healing, both before, right? You encountered this medical episode, having a stroke, and then after. Anything that you want to share about the power of art and now this new identity that you have as an artist in Mexico City?
Marissa, how much time you got?
We got time.
How much time you got? Um, and it's funny. I think I'm having a sort of full circle moment. Because I've been struggling a little bit. Ooh, need a coaster. I've been struggling a little bit with my creativity. Um, because it was something that I stumbled upon and kind of a lowish moment. I had been fired from a job, which was hard for me to say at a point, but they freaking liberated me because that was a job where I could not seem to. I should have quit within the first year of starting that damn job. I should have quit within a year, but I was like, I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to, I was VP of product development. I was on the website. It was a whole thing. I should have left. They were up to no kind of good. Um, and ultimately, I wound up working myself sick, literally, um,
Mm-hmm.
and wound up in the ER and out of pocket for a couple of days. And it was during those couple of days that I guess they got together and decided to make me the fall guy for a bad company acquisition.
Ooh. Okay.
Um, Now, I'm sure that those people would refute my statement that that is not what they consciously did, but it's what they did.
Mm-hmm.
It's what they did. But what they also did in the process was set me free. Because again, I liken it to leaving an abusive relation. It was an abusive relationship. Damn it. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
like I couldn't find a way to leave. I because I was like, I can find a way to fix this. I credit it for so many things. I credit it for my ADHD diagnosis because it was the time at which I was just like, why can't I figure this out? Why do I feel so overwhelmed? That was when the word overwhelmed became the thing that I thought of day and night. It was the word that ran through my head day and night. All I could
Mm-hmm.
think of was overwhelmed, 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 overwhelmed. And I remember my mother used to always say she thought she had that she had ADHD. And I remember being like, you don't have any ADHD. But somehow it came back to mind. She was an educator. I should have known that she knew what she was talking about. But she was no longer around to talk about it. And I remember one weekend, I did a search and pulled up some books on women and ADHD, just in desperation. I'm looking for something. And I found this book that had each chapter had little vignettes about like describing like an archetype of women with ADHD. You know, Ashley was always blah 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 blah, you know, as a teenager, and now here she was, and you know, she's divorced, whatever, just all these little stories. And as I'm reading them, tears just streaming down my face. I was like, oh my God, oh my God. So I go to get diagnosed. I go see a neuropsychologist because, of course, now I'd spent all weekend, hadn't slept, very ADHD-ish of me to pull all nighters researching ADHD, literally, because now I'm fascinated.
Mm-hmm.
So I go in to have the test, and they're like, and of course, I'm 30 minutes late for the test, the $1,200 test that I'm paying for out of pocket. And they're like, okay, well, did you get a normal night's sleep? And I'm like, well, I slept like 4 hours. And they're like, well, we can't test you. We need you to get a normal night's sleep. I'm like, that is a normal night's sleep for me. Duh. Right? Like,
4 hours.
oh, yeah, I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't sleeping then at all. Because I just kept thinking I can work more. If I work more, I can figure this out. Like I knew the cleaning people. I'd be in the office at 1 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday because I used to try to hide that I was working more. Trying to, girl, it was so stupid. It was stupid.
And I think we're socialized, right? To do that, as you mentioned, with the awards from such an early age.
Well,
right?
and at that point, it was a lot of shame that I had. I was hiding how much extra I was working, and then I now know in retrospect that it's very typical for people with ADHD and I did hire that same neuropsychologist that diagnosed me as my coach at that point. It was very typical for people with like high achieving, high functioning ADHD, particularly women, that when they reach a certain point in their career and there's a lack of structure, because once you reach a point where you're a VP, you don't have the structure of a same kind of job description that you do at lower levels, right? Where your job is detailed out for you, your tasks are detailed out for you. You're now designing it, you know?
Right.
And I always said, well, I did well with ambiguity. I did, but not complete ambiguity. And not when you add in like shenanigans and foolishness and misogyny and misogynoir and stupid politics and startup BS, you know, not when you add all that kind of stuff in. So, hold on, I'm just doing my mental rewind because I will interrupt myself a million times on a side quest. So, anyway, got laid off from that job. It was a blessing, but that was where the shame and blame started. And I remember I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next. And I remember saying, well, I don't want that level of position again, right? So I was starting to try to set boundaries for myself. And I said, well, I can do it with not getting that level of position. And of course, people wanted me for that level of position. I didn't want that anymore. So I was actually unemployed for about a year, and it worked out really well in the end because it kind of helped me get to where I am. I started watching YouTube. Had never watched YouTube, not a day in my life until this period of time when I'm unemployed. And before I had taken this job, this was in Boston, I had worked remotely. So I figured I would probably get another remote job. I worked in health insurance. And because of that, I wasn't quite sure where I should move to after I left Boston. So I temporarily moved in with my sister because I was like, well, I don't want to get a place. If I have to go to an office, I don't know where that office is. So I was like, well, I'll just park with her for a minute. So I would just be watching YouTube, reading books, puttering around, calling her, when you coming home? You know, all my friends are at work. I don't have anybody to play with during the day. So I'm watching YouTube, feeling pitiful. And somehow or another, I stumbled upon these videos where people were doing this thing called art journal. And I'm like, what's this? Well, I started journaling, like, you know, my thoughts and just kind of, you know, trying to figure out, kind of decompress. Like that was one of the suggestions that my ADHD coach had for me was like, one of the things she banned me from ever using Post-it notes again, because she would I would have to take my work bag in. And I remember the first time we met, I had to like take everything out my work bag. And I used to like write shit on post-it notes, and I'd have like
Mhm.
post-it note mountain. And one of my techniques was like, well, once I do something, I toss the post-it notes, and then the post-it notes will go down. Girl, the post-it notes never went down. They just stacked up. And so she was like, you are never allowed to use the post-it note again. I to this day I don't have a post-it note in here. And so she got me started with these brain dumps. Right. So she was like,
Mm.
she's like, you can write down everything because part of your overwhelm is you're holding things in your head. All your
Mhm.
to-dos are in your head. She's put them all on paper. Even if you're writing the same to-dos over and over again every day, right? And then we would take my to-do list, and she was like, girl, that ain't one thing. That is 12 things in one line item. You need to break that down.
Mhm.
That's why you can't get anything done on your list because your lists are too big. So it was this whole exercise we had to go through. So she started me writing. First it was list, and then it was just everything in my brain. So I was writing a lot. And they were doing this thing called art journaling. I was like, oh, this is interesting. And sometimes it would just be somebody putting watercolor on a page and they journal their thoughts over it. Sometimes it was them taking a photo of them and their kids. So it was a little bit of scrapbooking and watercolor. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And my sister would come home and she'd see me watching these YouTube videos. And so I have to give her all the credit. One day she comes home and she tosses a box at me, and it's this little teeny watercolor set. And she's like, well, you sit here and you watch this stuff all day. Why don't you go ahead and do it yourself? And that's the first time I ever painted anything, drew
Wow.
anything, did anything artistic, creative in that way
Mhm.
ever. And then eventually it became an obsession. Again, not very different for an ADHDer because I've always had a hobby of finding hobbies.
Mm.
That's not new. But eventually I'd make her, because I'm the big sister, I would make her sit down at the dining room table with me, and we would have our little arts and crafts nights, and we'd have stickers. Yes, A plus art is therapy. We'd have our little arts and crafts nights, and then I'd have other friends joining in. And it grew and grew and grew. And so I actually had a couple little examples. I don't know if they'll show on the screen, but like um here was probably one of my first little
Ooh.
art
Uh-huh.
journals, which was literally, oh, do I have how it kind of started? I don't, but this was just like a little piece of watercolor with some watercolor flowers, watercolor paper that I glued onto a book, some washi tape. Um, and an entry would be just like,
Ooh, that is
that
beautiful.
would be
Mhm.
writing. But I mean, it was
Mhm.
really just for me, and it was just a different way of writing and kind of creative, like all these little pockets and things where you'd write things.
Mhm.
If I get a postcard from somebody, I'd put it in there. um I put photos in here, but it was just like a pretty way of
Mhm.
journaling my thoughts.
Mhm.
And then I went from kind of doing that to making my friends do it with me, to hosting parties that were kind of like wine and sips, but instead they were like, or sip and paint rather. But instead of sip and paint, it was, brunch and art journaling. And then I started dabbling with acrylic paint. And then I started listening to podcasts about painters and hearing them and their process. And then I started going to museums, which I had never gone to in my life. And I would stare at the paintings and I'd look at the texture of the brushstrokes. Um, and I always say it was like at this time that I developed new eyes, is the best way I can
Mhm.
put it. And I started following like a bunch of different artists on YouTube. And there was one in particular that I was following. I took one of her like classes online, and she put out a casting call for people to be in a recorded class that she was hosting in her studio in Portland. And I remember saying, oh, she needs me there. And so I recorded my 2-minute little pitch, And I was just like, hey there, looking forward to meeting you because you're going to pick me because you need to have me in your class. And she picked me, and I flew out and participated in the session, and learned all these different techniques. And maybe it was a year and a half later, she called me and she asked me if I would be one of her assistants at a retreat she was hosting. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And she's like, I'll cover the cost of the stay and everything. I was like, oh, okay, where is it? It was in Bali. And so I was like, fabulous, I'll meet you in Bali.
Wow.
And it has just ballooned. And I now have pieces of art that I've created, and it sounds very strange to me to say, that are living with people in Portugal and back in the US and here in
Mm-hmm.
Mexico. And I have struggled with that. And I've pushed very hard against the grindification of this hobby of mine,
Mm-hmm.
this
Mm-hmm.
thing that I found that has brought me joy in a way that I've not had in my adult life. And I think that I literally just in the last 2 weeks have figured out how to do it in a way that won't make me unhappy. And I see that you included my uh did you reference,
Mm-hmm.
or you might have referenced it at some point, my YouTube channel. I started a YouTube channel. I actually started that shortly after the stroke.
Mm.
Because I was just like, I don't want to die with, and I have this conversation with people all the time, like dying isn't something that scares me because I know it's something that happens. Um, but I was like, I don't want to die without passing some of what I've gotten out of creativity onto other people, because I stumbled on it in such a weird way. And it so wasn't me before at all. Like at all. I mean, I remember going to art therapy when my mom was dealing with her breast cancer diagnosis. And I would do the stuff, but I was checked out. I didn't care. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
now, when I travel the world, the number
Mm-hmm.
one thing I'm excited about is where are the art supply shops. Art supply shops and art museums.
Mm-hmm.
That's so I'm a different person in that regard. So I started this YouTube channel, and it was just in the last 2 weeks that I figured out why I kind of stepped away from the channel. My first couple videos I think were really good, but I realized that they were overly curated in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at them, you might be like, they're just, I don't know what you mean by that, but they're not me enough. There's not enough tangents. There's not enough squirrels.
That makes so
Um,
much sense.
there's
Yes, I
there's
know
not
exactly
enough
what you're talking
randomness.
about.
There's no F bombs. Um, they feel very much like something that I might have created in my corporate life. They feel, sorry, they're not coming for me. Um, this time. They feel a little too polished, a little too curated.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that so I feel like I was putting myself back into a box in a way.
Yes, I can relate to that. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of shied away from it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But while I was on this cruise with my family, it was like 34 of us, it was amazing. We were in Alaska. And I love abstracts. I love a lot. I love, give me, um, give me a napkin from a good restaurant we've been to. Um, a Chinese, a fortune from a Chinese fortune cookie, and a crayon, and I'll create something with that. Um, so I mean, I like everything.
Mm-hmm.
I've described myself as a multimedia artist, multi mixed media artist. I think I'm going to change that to interdisciplinary artist, because I've gotten into sewing here, not as much as I'd like to. That might be one of those one of those hobbies I picked up that kind of, but it's got me really interested in textiles and fabrics
Hmm.
and um, what's on the fabric, seeing that as a piece of art. And so I'm like itching to start working fabrics into art and stitching. Um, so I had all these ideas running through my mind as I was on this cruise, but also as I'm looking at the glaciers and the mountains. I love landscapes. I like painting more realistic landscapes, also like abstract landscapes. I like everything.
Hmm.
I like everything. So my sleep has been disrupted the last couple nights, perimenopause, but also because I have all these ideas running through my head. And I have a whole list of all these things that I want to create, these series, and I've resisted it in a way. And I've been playing small because I didn't want it all to result in like the grindification of this thing that makes me so happy. And I have the benefit of having friends and strangers who love what I create in a way that is so odd to me because I've never cared about people liking what I do. Sometimes I don't like what I do, but I like what it felt when I did it. For me,
Hmm.
it's about the process more than it is about the outcome. Um, and I've sold work without trying to. I've actually probably resisted it, which is a very
Interesting.
interesting thing.
Uh-huh.
My first big piece that I sold, which was big, like big mantelpiece size big, like big enough to, for my king size bed big. A friend in the US had it and was moving it from her house to her car. I'd gone back to the States and I was going to get it. I was going to take it off the stretcher bars, roll it up and bring it back because I wanted to put it over my bed. And she sent me a text message. She was like, "Hey, I was moving your painting from my house to my car. My neighbor saw it. She wanted to know if it was for sale." And my first thought was, "Oh shit, I don't want to sell it. That's mine."
Hmm.
And so I was like, well, let me come up with a number that's high enough to make her say no. And I came up with a number and she was like, okay. And I was like, shit, that wasn't high enough. But I
Wow.
couldn't renege because I had given her a price. And she
Uh-huh.
said yes. So she was my first collector. Um, and so, it's now happened a few times. And and I had started an Instagram. God, Marissa, I don't know how long your videos usually are. I had started I started my Instagram because when I started following artists, I started also reading about art. I talk all day about this. And there's a guy named Austin Kleon who wrote a book called Show Your Work. And I read that book. It's a little teeny book. And it was about how if you're into creativity, if you're into art, drawing, even cooking, right? Like you into cooking and you like to present your work well. Um, Take a picture of it, share it with the world, right? Don't and if you're hesitant about it, don't put your name. Oh, I hate when that happens. I made the wrong sign. Um, and just share it with the world, but you can do it anonymously. So my Instagram account was anonymous, and I just started putting up like some of my first drawings. And so, like, if you scroll all the way back on my Instagram, I think the first thing I like ever drew is on
Hmm.
there. Um, and I never cared. I still don't care about whether people like what I create. I think though I've been afraid that people want to buy what I create because I think I've been so afraid that it would turn it into something that felt like work. And I've always had such a bad relationship with work that I think I was afraid of it. And I've had friends that are
Hmm.
like, girl, you could do this and you could do that and you could do, and I'm like, oh Lord, that sounds like a nightmare. That sounds like an absolute nightmare. But I
Yes.
think I think I figured out how to do it in a way that will keep it joyful to me. And I've put together literally, I mean, I was doing it when I was on the ship, the structure that I am going to use, which will always put the work that I do for myself first. And I think that coupling it with the YouTube channel and kind of bringing people along with me in my little crazy explorations and the failures, because again, I don't mind sharing the stuff that's ugly. Because to me, again, it's less about what it looks like and it's more about what it felt like when I was doing it. And I'd love to be talk with my hands. I don't know how to turn that feature off. I'd like to, if I could help one other person get some joy out of that. I also think it's a great, almost therapy for people who are perfectionists.
Yes.
So much, so much. You know, when I first kind of started dabbling in this and realized that I liked it and I wanted to continue in this, you know, in the kind of creativity art world, I thought I would go down the route of like realism, like learning how to properly draw a person, learning how to properly draw a thing, right? Like in proportions and the realism and the this and the that. And then it was, no, I like the fact that watercolor doesn't do what you want it to do.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
There's
Mm-hmm.
something freeing about that feels good to me in my body, in my mind, because I've always been so tightly trying to
Yes.
do things right
Mm-hmm.
that now I can do this thing that there is no right, there is no wrong. It just is.
That's freeing. Mm-hmm.
Mhm, mhm.
Mm. And so I want to ask, as we're winding down, if someone is out there used to maybe overworking, right, overachieving, pushing their bodies past the point where they're giving us these signals to slow down, to stop. Um, Anything that you would share, maybe even around like creativity and the benefits of leaning into your creativity to kind of, as you said, release some of that perfectionism and that grip that so many of us have on our lives.
Yes. So there was a book that I've started reading. I bought it long time ago, and I haven't read it. I've been reading a lot of things around it. But I started reading it when I got back from the cruise because again, it aligns with this sort of shift that I'm about to make, and it all kind of comes together timely because I literally had the cruise. I mean, had the stroke this time last year. It was October 18th. I was on a plane that I had the stroke. But there's a book that I would recommend if you're the nerdy type. If you're the nerdy type, if you're the nerdy type and you like to know how things work, there's a book that I'm going to recommend, and I'm going to probably on my YouTube channel. This is probably going to be one of the first things that I do, kind of in snippets and parts. You'll see my messy little studio desk and everything as a part of it. Is this book called Your Brain on Art? How the arts transform us. There is a new, it might not be new, but it's getting more press. There's a field of study called neuroaesthetics, which
Interesting.
is really about how arts and creativity, and I'm going to define that very broadly, right? How
Mm-hmm.
arts and creativity work to um, truly change your brain. And you know, that moment I had sitting on the plane where I could feel my brain rewiring. Now, I had just had truly a traumatic brain injury, right? So my brain had like powered down, it was powering back up, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
could feel it very acutely. Um, so it's not going to happen like that. But your brain will rewire based on exposure to creativity in the arts. Best when you're doing it, but even through just observing it. And that's what the study of neuroaesthetics is about. So it's better when you're doing it with your hands. And it can be painting, it can be music, it can be cooking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anything where you are, if you think about the idea of creating something out of nothing, that's really what it is, right? It could be sewing, it could be needle arts. Um, but it also can be appreciating the artwork of others. There's a quote by, oh, I didn't even ask you, Marissa, if I could curse on your channel, but you didn't shut me down.
Oh yeah,
Um,
feel free.
I fucking hate Picasso. He was a jackass, a misogynist, and a thief. Okay. But because he was popular, his quotes are well known. But he has this quote that I probably can't even spit out accurately, but it has to do with like, as children, we were all artists, and as adults, we've forgotten to be. That is a
Hmm.
really bad interpretation. That the quote is more eloquent than I would like to give him credit for. But um, it's true. We have like any kid, you give them a box of crayons and a piece of paper. Well, maybe not now with with the internet and tablets and stuff, but back in the day, you
Yeah.
give a kid a piece of paper, crayons, something to write with. They're going to write you a story. They're going to draw you a picture, and they're going to show you their picture and tell you how fabulous it is with the
Hmm.
head on a foot, right?
Hmm.
You couldn't tell them it was ugly. But I don't know at what age that changes, but it does. But that is something that is inherent in who we are as humans. We are meant to create. So we need to be doing something to create. And in the age of the internet and social media, and with these teams of highly paid people, and I'm saying this for myself as much as I am for anybody else, these highly paid people, highly educated people who are creating platforms to addict us to consume.
Yes. Hmm. Hmm.
Oh, that sounds like that just sounds profound of me. Um, but they are colluding to get us addicted to these platforms.
Yes, they are.
I would
Hmm.
challenge us to figure out a way to create at least a fraction of the amount of which we consume. It is so unbalanced. And that's not how we're supposed to be as humans. Even in the hunter gatherer phase, we were creating solutions to problems that kept us alive.
Hmm.
Now, unfortunately, right now, we may need to be doing some of those same things, but like, just take it up a couple levels on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Um, whether you are creating a scarf, uh, a curry, a short story,
Hmm.
I think it's imperative for not just our body, but for our mind. The two are connected
Yes, they
inextricably.
are. Hmm.
You cannot heal one without the other.
Yes. Hmm.
And I don't see a way where you do that without some degree of creativity. I would even say even if that's just appreciating the art of others through reading, because writing is a creative exercise. Reading could be one too. Um, so I think that we've got to figure out how to work, and creativity is actually one of the 7 types of rest. If you're
Hmm.
familiar, I mean, I know you're familiar with everything, but if your audience is familiar
But
with
I
the
am.
types of rest,
Yes.
um, and I guess that maybe that brings us full circle, Marissa, right? To the start of our conversation about learning to rest and recharge after periods of working really really hard and burnout. Um, Being well rounded in how we rest. It isn't just sleeping, as I learned, right? It isn't just napping. It isn't just removing the external stress that you can't control, because clearly in my case that was not enough. A lot of the damage had already been done. um, but there's more active way, and the massages I was then getting weren't enough.
Hmm.
My fresh uh, fruit juices from the corner weren't enough.
Hmm.
But let's think about adding creativity to our toolkit as a self-care technique.
Mhm.
You know, write a little short story, um, and think about a way to um, express your creativity, maybe through an anonymous um, Instagram page. I don't know. We might have lost Marissa, but I'll keep going. I think she'll be back. Looks like we're still live. Um, or I don't know. I'm trying to just give some examples that might not be painting, if that seems overwhelming to folks. You cook a beautiful meal, and maybe you don't want to post it online. Take a photo, print it, put it in your journal for you to look back at. Um, Maybe the making it real in an analog way would be helpful for you on an ongoing basis. Okay, I'm not sure if we're still on or live. Can someone make a comment if they're still hearing this? All right, if the audience is still, oh, okay, we're still on. Thanks, Vicky girl. It looks like Marissa is coming back. She's on her way. The other thing that I would say is writing is probably the most accessible way to express your creativity. And there's one little technique that's like, you can't complain that you don't have time. There's a few journals out there that you could buy, but we don't need to give people our money at this day and age. If you have an old journal sitting around, some, loose leaf paper, you could write on the back of something that you have, but it's a technique called a line a day. So it's really simple. You write a line a day. Just kind of date it. You could do it in the morning, maybe. You could do it at the end of your day. You could give yourself a theme to make it easy. So you don't have to sort of think of what to write, where maybe it's, one thing that you're grateful for in the day. And if you're reaching, it could be you're grateful for your new sheets, or, you're grateful, and I don't want to do anything that's negative, right? So like a lot of times, you kind of force yourself to document the things that you're grateful for, but it ends up being like, I'm grateful I didn't kill anybody at work today. So maybe not that to that degree, but like, you're grateful for your new sheets, you're grateful for, the super friendly person in the elevator that afternoon after your, tough meeting or whatever. And you do that for a year, and you're able to go back and look at it, maybe at the end of the year, maybe at the end of the month, the end of the week if you've had a tough week. And maybe that just highlights those little glimmers, right? That gives you a little bit of an uplift when you need it. But writing's probably the most accessible way, because all you need is a pen and a piece of paper. Or if you don't even want to go do that, maybe you use your notes app on your phone. But I do find that using an analog means of creativity, for many people, can be a little bit better than relying on a digital means, just because we spend so much of our life at work, online. But if you would like to draw on your iPad, or if writing in your notes app is about the best you can do, then do that. It's about doing what works for you, what gives you a moment of relief, a moment of pause. This isn't about judgment. It's about, finding those moments. Let's see. It looks like Marissa is trying to come back in.
I'm back.
Oh, I hear you.
The Wi-Fi is just in and out, so my video's not on. But yes,
oh, that is so cute. You sound like Minnie Mouse.
Oh, wow. Does my voice sound different?
No, you really sound like Minnie Mouse.
Yeah, so technical difficulties a little bit, but I do want to thank you so much, Dara, for being here, sharing everything that you shared. Thank you so much for everyone who is here live. In the chat, if you're watching the replay, thank you so much. Please subscribe to Dara's channel and get it up here one more time on
Yes.
YouTube.
And be on the lookout for new content and new format. And I welcome feedback on what you want to see, because I definitely would like to make it a collaborative community. So I look forward to meeting you.
Wonderful. And yes, please subscribe to her Instagram as well to see her beautiful, beautiful art. And thank you so much for being here and sharing everything that you've shared. Just the information of your personal story and what you went through, I think is going to just have a huge ripple effect. So I appreciate you. I'm so glad we got to speak live. Yes.
Thank you, Marissa. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, y'all. Thank you so much.
Bye.